Divine Truth Assistance Group. Group assistance sessions putting principles of divine truth into action. This recording is from the Developing My Loving Self group and is part of an Education in Love series. In the Session 2 group feedback presentation, Jesus gives group feedback regarding how to measure our personal progression and current state by examining our feelings about developing faith, seeking truth, taking love in action, and feeling and experiencing all emotions. Recorded on the 25th of May 2016 in Noosa, Queensland, Australia.
Okay, so the subject that I want to talk to you about is measuring where I am in the process of understanding and releasing my unloving self. Time for me to put that one away, I think. Just let me grab another. All right. So that's the subject I would like to discuss with you. Interesting question? Okay. Well, if I get angry a lot, where do you think I am? In my addictions, not getting met. If I feel satisfied a lot and I haven't made much progress, where do you think I am? My addictions not getting met. If I don't feel I've got much problem at all, where do you think I am? Denial. If I've got a physical pain in my body about a particular, whatever it is in a particular area of my body, where do you think I am? Denial of what? Because I might have gone through this, mightn't I? I could be in denial of that, couldn't I? Still not at the pain, but just not yet feeling that, couldn't I? But am I there if I've accepted my facade? Yes. If I haven't accepted my facade, there. Okay. So, let's look at 4 issues, 4 ways of measuring. The first method is truth. What do you feel my feelings about truth would be here? Complete denial? What would be my feelings about truth here?
I know everything.
Well, no, that would be here. I know everything would be here. If it's here, it would be, my feelings about truth would be, anywhere here, my feelings of truth will be,
I have my own truth.
Scared of truth, my brothers and sisters, frightened of truth. Huh? How many of you are frightened of truth still? Most of you. Yep, frightened of truth. Why would you be frightened of truth? Because the global terror still exists. And you still have false beliefs about truth. You still think the lie is preferable to the truth. Does that make sense? It's definitely in the facade because the facade believes the lie is preferable to the truth. Does that make sense? Once you get to love the truth, then you might be starting to get down here, right? So can you see, truth is a great way of measuring where you are. If your attitude to it, your emotion about it. All right? So if your emotion about truth is I'm scared of it, then we're here. If your emotion of truth is I'm resistive to it, then we're probably way up here. If the emotion of truth is I love it, right, then that's a good indication that we're now getting down into here, away from our facade, living out of our facade now. Instead of living in it, we're living out of it. We're now challenging our facade. Challenging your facade. You think remember, one of the ways of identifying a facade is the facade loves the lie. It portrays the lie to its environment, so it loves the lie, right? That's what it does. It portrays the lie to the environment. So a person who loves truth would not do that, so that tells you where you are, their attitude to truth, how you feel about it. Now, can you see in each question I've asked, how do you feel about it? Can you see that? So if I feel scared of the truth, then that tells me that I'm probably still liking my facade. But if I no longer feel scared of the truth, and in fact I love the truth, then that tells me I'm starting to get towards the truth of my life, towards the pain and the other things. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if I'm frightened of truth, I'm up here. I have to do work up here. If I love the truth, now I'm probably down in this area here, working the way through some things here. Now, sometimes you can love the truth on one thing, can you not? And hate the truth on another thing, right? So remember that this diagram applies to each individual emotion, not to your whole condition. Many of you have been applying it to your whole condition rather than to each individual emotion, right? Now, with one exception, that is, this emotion here does govern a huge amount of things, and therefore a huge amount of emotions. This global refusal of your terror. Does that make sense? That, of course, does that. But aside from that, sometimes you can go through this whole process and actually feel some pain and release a bit of facade in the process and see the facade, release it, get down to here where you love the truth about that particular issue, so you feel about that particular issue and you release some pain about that issue and your life changes while you've still got denial in other areas. Does that make sense? Yep. Okay. But the global refusal of your terror is going to affect every area. It's going to have an effect on everything you process, and that's why it's a great emotion to get rid of. All right. So, truth is a great way and here we're saying my feelings about truth is a great way of measuring where I'm at. My feelings about truth. Now, what's the opposite to truth? Fear. Yeah, lies are all caused by fear, isn't it? The false appearing real, expectations appearing real. Truth is the antidote to fear. It's the thing that opposes fear. It releases fear. So we can say fear is the opposite to it. Okay, so we can also ask ourselves, well, how do I feel about fear? So if I still feel frightened of it, then that's an indication I'm up here still. Does that make sense? Because I haven't done this yet. Right? It's also an indication of whether I live in it, if I live in it or not. So the majority of us live in fear. In other words, we have the attitude of the justification of fear. So we say, of course I haven't done that. You know, that's not normal to do that. We see that whenever our fear is triggered, we think that whatever we've done after that is normal. Right? And if we believe that, then that we're still up here. So when I say, and I've given you these illustrations before, you know, well, your wife comes along, she put a new pair of jeans on. How do I look in this? And she's a bit large on the rear. But can't say that. So isn't that fear? Isn't that fear that you're feeling? Not being able to say that. Not being able to tell the truth about what you feel. She's asked you what you feel. Somebody just yelled out, Bruce yelled out, survival. But yeah, that's right. You're afraid. for your very life. And perhaps for your sexual activity in the next 3 years or so. And so what do? So you lie. So that tells you that fear generated a lie. So therefore truth, you're still afraid of truth. You're still afraid of the power of truth and the benefit to truth and so forth. So that tells you you're up here. Does that make sense? So this is one way you can measure where you're at. Now, there's a lot more we could say about that, but let's move on to what else we can do to determine what's going on. Let's look at this issue of faith, which is another quality we need, isn't it? One of the tools. Let's examine our faith. So let's look at it here. So a person up here feels what about faith, do you think? Yeah, they like to be cynical, doubtful, unsure, don't they? Yep. By the time you get down to here, you're going to have some pretty solid faith to even get through that stage, aren't you? To be sure that you can get through it, to have some confidence in God and the way God's made you and all of that. So that means by the time you're here, you must have developed some faith and you're not so impacted. Now, also, a person who has faith chooses to not sin, even though it's hard sometimes to not sin. Right? In other words, they know that if they don't sin, they won't be adding to their problems down the track. A person who has no faith in that sins freely. In other words, they engage their addictions, they engage this next addiction, the next addiction, without even any thought. They just go ahead and do it. And they look back and they go, oh, there I went again. But by the time that's happened, it's already done, right? You've already done it, so it's already done. So what we need to see is that if we're doing things automatically in our addictions, then obviously we don't have very much faith. Because we wouldn't automatically do things in our addictions if we had faith. Do you see that? We would check ourselves. We'd go, hang on a sec, here we go again, I'm off on my addiction again. I can feel it dragging me, I can feel it pulling me, I can feel it trying to make me do something, but I've got to not do it. A person who has some faith would stop themselves in the tracks there, wouldn't they? Right? Bruce, you want to say if we pass them? Right.
But aren't you just using your willpower there?
No. Well, faith is a global emotion. So I would say you're using your faith to stop your action.
That's even if you go back and check, you bump into that addiction.
You're about to engage your addiction.
Yep. You pull yourself back.
And I've got some faith. If I've got some faith, I'll pull myself back from it. Some faith that if I do that, it's going to be a negative consequence. And it doesn't mean that I've dealt with the original cause yet, but as long as I've got some faith, I will actually feel like, no, if I go ahead and do that, it's going to be a negative consequence. And if I don't do that, I'll have a positive outcome. So I'm going to do the positive thing, right, because of my faith.
Yeah, so that's the difference, because I guess, can hop out of an addiction pretty quickly, but it'll still come up and up and up and up.
It will continue to come up, and a person who has faith would go, okay, I need to delve down into this and find it, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
They'd do that as well. Yep.
Thanks.
Yep. So what's the opposite of faith, really? Doubt. Yeah, doubt, cynicism. Doubt, cynicism. Yep, if we go down to Glenda.
So this is where regular reflection would be good.
That's what I'm getting at, yes. Yep, it's good you arrived there. So yes, what I'm saying is a person who is self-reflective and self-aware understands the feelings they have about the 4 primary tools. Does that make sense to you? They feel the feelings they have. And therefore, because they feel the feelings they have, they measure where they are. Right. So let's write down the other 2 primary tools. which were action and emotion, or you could say humility, couldn't you? Or emotion. Can you see the way I measure where I'm at is my feelings about these tools? That's how I measure where I'm at. So if I feel afraid to take action, can you see I'm probably still up here somewhere? But if I feel like taking action and it's exciting, right, then where do you think I am? Must be down here somewhere, mustn't I? A person who's taking action, who's excited about taking a loving action, then that person obviously really wants to take the loving action. They've already dealt with quite a lot, obviously, of terror about taking action, and they ignore fears about taking action. They take action even though they might be afraid. That's what they do. Right? They love to take action. They get a whole heap of things done in their life that are all in harmony with God's version of love. That's what they do. And if we look at this issue of humility again, like if I have an emotional experience and it lasts me 5 seconds and it's over, then can you say you're down here yet? Not really, right? Because you're not yet open to accepting your pain. Right? A lot of the pain has to come out, and it's going to require a bit of crying, and sometimes for an hour or two. And if you can only do it for a few minutes on an issue and you still know there's more there and nothing much is changing, then that indicates that you're still up here somewhere in the deconstruction process. Does that make sense? So the beauty of understanding the tools is that you can also now use your feelings about the tools to analyse where you're at. And it's your feelings about the tools, how you personally feel about these tools, that determine where you really are in the scheme of things. A person who is passionate about these things has usually finished up getting through this, and they're usually down in this area here, right? Anger, rage, all those emotions, denial, all these kind of things, excuses, shifting the blame, justifying, all those, remember those tools we use to resist truth, and the tools we use to resist faith, and the tools we use to resist action, which were all those denial, excuses, lies, justifications, blames, judging, all those tools we use to resist the development of those qualities. They will indicate we're up here, yet to work our way through those particular things. Does that make sense? So it's pretty simple, isn't it, to see where we're at? And is it bad to see where we're at? It's excellent to see where we're at. Why? Because you can't change from where you're at unless you know where you're at. It's essential to know where you're at. And this is what I see a lot of people doing. Yeah, and we mentioned this in the Paget messages, actually. A lot of people are telling themselves they've received God's love when they haven't. They tell themselves that a positive feeling they have must be God love when it is not. And they tell themselves a whole heap of lies about this because they want to believe they've progressed further than they have. And the desire to believe you've progressed further than you have is a part of your facade. Yeah, it is. So that's what I wanted to raise with you, a bit of feedback. One reason why I've raised it is because I feel it's really good to know how you're going in different areas, you know. Now, some areas you'll find you've developed some of this and you're probably down here or maybe here. But other areas you'll find, because if you haven't dealt with that global issue. Obviously, that's a major thing. But with most areas, you will find you're in various ranges up here. Right from denial, right from even intellectual denial. You don't even know. Like, you're totally ignorant of what's there. And so when you ask a question about something and I start talking about, it's this particular problem, you go, I don't know, what in the hell are you talking about? I don't agree with you at all. Well, that's like way up here in the denial area, and that's okay. God's not going to punish you for being in denial. God's laws are already trying to correct it, right? So God's not going to get out there's a stick and put you over his lap and give you a bit of a belting for being in denial. God knows that he gave you will, and that is your free will choice to be in denial if that's what you want to be in, right? And you're allowed to be in denial. You're allowed to stay in denial for the rest of your life if that's what you really want. You're not going to be very happy doing it, but that's the penalty, the unhappiness that comes from remaining blocked to true emotional expression, releasing pain and also getting into a state of love. Now, what we've done over the last 4 days now, so we're near the end of our 4 days in this section, is the first section was all about looking at understanding our unloving self. You remember? And up until the area of accepting our facade, most of us felt pretty connected with that material, didn't we? Right? So that tells you also where you have an affinity to the material is usually also where you're at. Does that make sense? And then when we start getting into the global emotions and the deconstruction of the facade and the accepting and releasing our pain, most of us get a bit at sea there, a bit confused. Yesterday we were a bit confused. Today, feeling a bit confused, can't even ask questions on the subject. So that tells me that we don't have an affinity to that yet as a group. Does that make sense? So that tells us where we're at too. And that is so we're at the point where we're still coming to terms with our unloving self, in other words, and in terms of understanding it, but yet at the point where we really want to get rid of it. Does that make sense? And that doesn't apply to everybody, but most people are in that phase. Most people who hear divine truth on the planet are still in that place. So that's where we're at. The key is to not condemn where we're at, to not judge where we're at, to not deny where we're at, to not shift the blame onto someone else about where we're at, not use those other tools that we use to deny developing these qualities, right? We don't do that. Instead, we come face to face where we're at. We get onto this process of accepting our facade. We do it. We go ahead and do it. We see ourselves for what we really are right now. And once we can do that, now we have a great capacity to change. And in fact, what will happen is once you allow yourself to see yourself as you really are, you'll probably not be that happy with where you are. And that will be a part of the motivation to change. Where you go, well, I know how to change now. I know I've got to just delve into this from an emotional perspective now, and I've got to go through some phases. Accepting my facade, my first phase, if you like, that I've got to go through, and then getting down to deconstructing my facade, another phase I've got to go through. And I accept these phases are ahead of me, and I start my way of working my way through it because I want to. And one thing I must say to you is you want to because you have enough love of yourself to do it. And I feel that's something that many of you haven't yet considered, having enough love of yourself to do it. Not just love of others and love of God, but also enough love of yourself to do it. So part of developing my loving self is developing a state where I finish up loving myself enough to go through what I have to go through to become perfect. And that means being gentle with yourself while you do it, being kind while you do it, but not letting it go, not letting yourself off the hook for doing it, but really wanting to do it, developing an aspiration within your heart to do it. God rewards those pure aspirations. Yeah. So that's what I would like to encourage you to do. And in a minute we'll have a bit of a review of the whole process so that we can remember the main points of it all, and then we'll give you some homework about it. But what I'd like to encourage you to do is to be willing to examine oneself, examine myself openly, with this knowledge that how I feel about these primary tools determines where I am. And if you're honest with yourself about how you feel about these things in your heart, then you'll know fairly accurately where you are. And it's good to know where you are. Because once you know where you are, you know what can change or what you need to change.